Let me tell you about the time I waged a completely silent, absolutely petty, deeply satisfying war against my own cousin. And the entire battlefield was a stack of fast food coupons that came in the mail every single week. Now before you say anything, yes, I know. Coupons. But hear me out. Because this story is not really about coupons. It is about a man who moved into someone else's home and immediately decided he was the most important person in it. A man who policed every conversation, stormed out of rooms like a toddler throwing a tantrum, and treated the people who gave him a roof over his head like they were the problem. And it is about the moment I decided that if he was going to act like he owned the place, I was going to make sure he never got his hands on the one tiny thing in that house that actually made him happy. Every single week. For months. Without saying a single word. This is the story of the most gloriously petty revenge I have ever pulled off in my life. And I regret absolutely nothing. If you have ever had to share a space with someone who made every room they walked into feel smaller, who judged everything you did, policed everything you said, and somehow managed to be both insufferable and completely untouchable, this story is for you. Hit that like button right now, subscribe if you are new here, and get comfortable. Because sometimes the most satisfying revenge is not the biggest, loudest, most dramatic thing you can do. Sometimes it is the smallest, quietest, most consistent little thing. Done perfectly. Week after week after week. Let's get into it. Let me paint you a picture of the kind of person my cousin Danny is, because understanding him is essential to understanding why what I did felt so extraordinarily, cosmically correct. Danny was 24 years old when he moved into our family home. I was younger, still living with my parents, and the house, our house, the one my parents owned and paid for and opened up to family when family needed it, suddenly had a new occupant who arrived with a suitcase, a superiority complex, and approximately zero awareness that he was a guest. Now I want to be fair here. Lots of people move in with family temporarily. Life is complicated. Circumstances shift. There is nothing inherently wrong with a young adult needing to stay with relatives for a while. What is wrong, what makes a person like Danny genuinely insufferable to share a space with, is when that person arrives in your home and immediately begins conducting themselves like they are doing you the favor. Danny was, in the most complete and fully realized sense of the word, a know-it-all. Not the charming kind of know-it-all who at least has the social grace to make their opinions sound like suggestions. The other kind. The kind where every observation they make has this undercurrent of barely concealed contempt, like they are constantly adjusting their expectations downward to accommodate the intellectual limitations of everyone around them. The kind where you can say something completely mundane, comment on the weather, mention something you watched on television, share a thought about literally anything, and somehow, inexplicably, they find a way to make your contribution to the conversation feel like a mistake. He was judgmental in that specific, exhausting way where nothing you did was quite right, but he never gave you explicit instructions on how to do it better either. He just looked. That particular look, you know, the one. The slight narrowing of the eyes. The almost imperceptible pause before responding. The way he would nod slowly, like he was deciding how much patience to allocate to your presence today. Living with someone who looks at you like that every single day is a specific kind of low-grade psychological misery that is very hard to explain to people who have not experienced it. He was also, and this is important for later, deeply paranoid. Not in a clinical sense, in that particular social sense where someone is so convinced of their own significance that they genuinely believe other people are constantly scheming around them, talking about them, plotting against them. The kind of paranoia that is actually just a very large ego wearing a trench coat. Because to be paranoid about people conspiring against you, you first have to believe that you are important enough to conspire against. Danny very much believed that. And yet, and this is the thing that made living with him so particularly maddening, he would never actually say anything directly. That was his signature move. He would simmer. He would stew. He would carry his grievances around like a backpack full of rocks, getting heavier and heavier, until eventually he would just storm out of the room without a word and leave everyone to figure out what they had done wrong this time. For about a year this was annoying but manageable. He was family. He was staying temporarily. You breathe through it, you give it space, you tell yourself it will not be forever. And then his girlfriend moved in. Her name was Claire. And Claire was almost immediately one of those people you just genuinely like without any particular effort on either side. Easy to talk to, warm, funny in that dry, understated way that takes you by surprise and makes you laugh harder than you expected. She and I built up a friendship naturally, The way you do when you are spending significant amounts of time in the same house with someone who turns out to be good company. We talked. That was it. That was the whole thing. We sat in the living room and we talked about television, about music, about nothing in particular, the way people who share a space and get along well often do. It was completely platonic, completely casual, completely the kind of low-stakes human connection that makes a house feel like a home instead of just a building you sleep in. Danny hated it. Now when I say hated, I do not mean he had a quiet reservation about it that he kept to himself. I mean he hated it in the active, physical, visibly uncomfortable way that is almost impressive in how little it attempts to hide itself. You could watch it happen in real time. Claire and I would be mid-conversation about something entirely unremarkable, and you would see it move across Danny's face, that particular tightening around the jaw, that restless shifting in his seat, that energy of a man who is deciding between escalating and retreating and cannot quite commit to either. And then he would stand up and walk out. Not to another room, not to the kitchen, but out through the front door into the yard with the specific energy of someone making a statement without having the nerve to actually make a statement. Claire, patient as she was, would follow him. She would go out to the front yard, find him standing there radiating wounded indignation, and ask him what was wrong. And he would point, through the living room window, to where I was sitting. And whatever he said to her out there, and he said plenty apparently, he would never, not once, come back inside and say any of it to me. Not one single time. He complained to her about me consistently, at length, with what I can only imagine was enormous dramatic conviction given how frequently it happened. And Claire, to her credit, would come back inside with the expression of someone who has just been asked to deliver a message she finds embarrassing on behalf of the sender, and relay whatever Danny's latest grievance was. He did not like us talking. He did not like that we laughed at things he was not part of. He did not like me sitting in front of the window. He did not like the specific, irreplaceable crime of two people in the same house getting along comfortably when one of those people was his girlfriend. Now, I want you to really sit in the particular absurdity of this situation. 'Cause Danny was there. In the room. Every single time. This was not something happening behind his back, in secret, in dark corners. It was two people having a conversation in a shared living room while he sat right there. His solution to his discomfort was not to join the conversation, was not to address me directly, was not to make any kind of reasonable adult request. His solution was to physically remove himself from the room, and then send his girlfriend back in to deliver his complaints like some kind of medieval herald. I sat with that for a while. I gave it time. I told myself that he was probably just going through something, that people are complicated, that living in someone else's house is uncomfortable, and maybe it was bringing out the worst in him. I made excuses for the behavior the way you do when you are trying to preserve the peace in a shared space. And then I started to get genuinely, properly ticked off. Here is where the story takes its gloriously petty turn. There was a very specific ritual in our house that Danny had appointed himself sole owner of, with absolutely no authority to do so and absolutely no acknowledgement that this was something he had simply decided unilaterally. The coupons. Every week or thereabouts, a bundle of fast food coupons would arrive in the mail. The glossy kind with the bright red and yellow colors and the pictures of burgers that always look significantly better in the photograph than in the actual paper bag. They were for chain restaurants, fast food places, the kind of everyday discounts that most households share around or leave in a communal spot for whoever wants them. Danny did not share them. Danny did not leave them in a communal spot. Danny would hear the mail arrive, appear in the hallway with a speed and attentiveness he never applied to anything else in the house, and gather those coupons up like a man securing important documents ahead of an approaching storm. They went straight to his room. They were his. He had decided this. Nobody had agreed to it, nobody had been consulted, nobody had signed anything. He had simply claimed them through the power of always getting there first and the implicit social difficulty of saying, "Actually, can I have some of those, please?" to a grown man who is already walking away with them. Now, under normal circumstances, if Danny had been a normal, tolerable, live and let live kind of housemate, this would have been mildly funny at most. A quirk. One of those things you mention to friends and laugh about. Some people are just weirdly territorial about strange things, and coupons are a harmless enough thing to be territorial about. But Danny was not a normal, tolerable, live and let live housemate. Danny was the man who stood in the front yard pointing at me through the window because I had the audacity to speak to his girlfriend in the shared living room. Danny was the man who communicated every grievance through a human intermediary, rather than ever addressing me directly. Danny was the man who had moved into our family home, and somehow managed to make me feel like an unwelcome presence in the house I had lived in for years before he arrived. So when I looked at those coupons, when I really looked at them and understood exactly how much Danny cared about them, exactly how much quiet, disproportionate joy they gave him, exactly how reliably he appeared for them every single week like clockwork, something clicked. Not a dramatic click. Not the movie moment where the protagonist stands up straight and stares into the distance with fire in their eyes. More like the quiet internal click of a small and very specific idea slotting perfectly into place. If he was going to make my life in this house quietly, consistently, relentlessly annoying, then I was going to return the favor. In the most petty, untraceable, satisfying way I could manage. I was going to take the coupons. The plan in its elegant simplicity was this. I would get to the mail first. That was it. That was the entire operation. I would get to the mail before Danny did. Remove the coupons and redirect them to my best friend, who was more than happy to receive a weekly bundle of fast food discounts with absolutely no questions asked. The execution required one thing from me: attention. I had to be aware of roughly when the mail came. I had to be positioned to intercept it before Danny's radar went off. For a man who paid almost no useful attention to anything happening in the house, Danny had an almost supernatural sensitivity to the sound of mail hitting the box or being slid under the door. He moved fast. He was motivated. The coupons were apparently a genuine priority, so I had to be faster. And I was. The first time I did it, I felt a small private thrill that I can only describe as deeply satisfying in a way that was completely disproportionate to the act itself. I reached the mail, found the coupon bundle, tucked it under my arm with the practiced casualness of a man simply collecting the household post, and walked away. Simple. Clean. Untraceable. I gave them to my best friend that afternoon. He was confused but delighted. The second time I was quicker about it. Getting smoother. The third time I barely had to think about it at all. And Danny began to notice. Let me describe what noticing looked like for Danny, because it was a genuinely beautiful thing to observe without appearing to observe it. It started with a slight increase in the urgency with which he checked the mail. Then a certain tightness around the mouth when he came back from the mail with nothing. Then the questions, not to me, never to me, because Danny did not speak to me directly about things that bothered him, but audible from the other room to Claire. Where were the coupons this week? Did the mail even come? Are they not doing those anymore? Why has the mail been so useless lately? And Claire, who I am fairly certain had at least a reasonable suspicion of what was happening but maintained perfect diplomatic neutrality throughout, would relay these observations to me with an expression that was carefully, professionally neutral except around the eyes, where it was slightly less so. I said nothing. I looked appropriately puzzled. The mail is so unreliable lately, isn't it? Here is what makes petty revenge so uniquely satisfying compared to its larger, more dramatic cousins. It requires patience. It requires consistency. It requires the ability to enjoy something privately, internally, without any external validation or acknowledgement. There is no confrontation moment. There is no scene where the other person finds out and has to reckon with what you have done. There is just the quiet, steady, week after week pleasure of knowing something they do not know, of holding a card they cannot see, of winning a game they do not even know is being played. For someone like Danny, who had been playing his own quiet game of low-level psychological torment for months, who had made it his business to be consistently, persistently aggravating without ever giving me anything direct enough to actually respond to, this particular flavor of revenge was custom-made. He had taught me the game after all. The game where you do something that bothers the other person, and then make it completely impossible for them to call you on it. The game where the frustration has nowhere to go because there is nothing specific enough to point to. He had been playing that game with me for months, standing in the front yard pointing at windows and sending his girlfriend back inside with his complaints like I was supposed to sit and take it indefinitely. I had simply learned the rules, and found my own version of the move. Every week the coupons came, I got there first. Every week Danny searched the mail with increasing agitation and came up empty. Every week my best friend got a fresh bundle of fast food discounts and lived his best life. I started to look forward to mail days with a cheerfulness that must have seemed, to anyone paying attention, slightly difficult to explain. There was one particular week, I remember it with real fondness, where Danny was home all day. I could hear him moving around, could sense that particular quality of restlessness that meant he was waiting for something. The same way you can feel someone in a waiting room willing the clock to move faster. The mail came. I was already nearby. I moved with the casual, unhurried pace of someone who just happened to be walking past, collected everything, removed the coupons with the smooth efficiency of many weeks of practice, and continued on my way. Danny emerged from his room approximately 45 seconds later. Checked the mail. Found nothing. Stood there for a moment with his hand still in the empty mailbox, which is one of the most quietly comedic images I have had the pleasure of witnessing in my life. Then walked back inside without a word. I went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea. The internal satisfaction was immense. Quiet, private, and immense. The thing about consistently denying someone a small thing they really want is that the smallness of the thing makes it genuinely impossible for them to express how much it bothers them. This is the elegant cruelty of petty revenge, and I use the word cruelty lightly here, in the context of coupons and fast food discounts, so let's keep appropriate perspective. Danny could not march into the living room and announce that the coupons had been going missing for weeks, and he was suspicious and upset about it. Even for Danny, who had very little difficulty making everyone around him aware of his various dissatisfactions, this was a bridge too far. How do you complain about coupons? How do you sit across from your relatives and say, I believe someone in this household has been intercepting my fast food discount bundles and I would like answers? You cannot. Not without revealing the full, slightly absurd scope of how much you care about those coupons. Not without the conversation becoming very quickly a much more revealing conversation about you than you intended. So Danny did what Danny always did. He simmered. He complained to Claire in the other room. He asked questions about mail delivery schedules. He stood at the mailbox on days when the mail was late with an expression of concentrated hope that would have been quite touching if it had been for literally anything else. And every week I got there first. Claire told me once, with that carefully maintained neutral expression that barely held around the edges, that Danny had started wondering if perhaps the postal service in our area had simply stopped including the coupons for some reason. Maybe they had changed their distribution schedule. Maybe this particular neighborhood was no longer in the delivery zone. I nodded thoughtfully. That could certainly be it, I said. She looked at me for a moment. I looked back at her. Neither of us said anything else about it. I want to be clear about something. I was not consumed by this. I did not wake up every morning plotting the next coupon interception like some kind of household criminal mastermind. It was not the kind of revenge that takes over your life, that costs you sleep, that requires significant emotional investment. It was precisely the opposite of all those things. It was light. It was easy. It required almost no effort beyond a mild increase in my awareness of when the mail arrived. And that lightness, that effortlessness was a significant part of what made it so satisfying. Because here is the thing about living with someone who drains the energy out of a space. The constant low-level frustration of it, the steady weight of navigating someone else's moods and paranoia and indirect communications and pointed silences, that costs something. It costs you in small ways every day, that add up over time into a kind of persistent low-grade exhaustion that is very hard to shake when you share a roof with the source of it. The coupons cost me nothing. They gave me something instead. Every successful interception was a small deposit into an account that Danny had been steadily withdrawing from for months. A quiet, private balancing of a ledger that I was not allowed to balance openly. And my best friend, who by this point had developed a genuine appreciation for a particular fast food restaurant's limited time offer, was living his best life entirely by accident. There is something beautiful about that. The idea that the petty revenge against someone making your life smaller actually made someone else's life, in a small and completely unrelated way, slightly better. The coupons did not go to waste. They went to someone who appreciated them. Danny's loss was genuinely, literally, someone else's gain. That is not something you can plan for. That is just the universe having a quiet sense of humor. The campaign, and I feel comfortable calling it that now, lasted for months. Week after week, mail day after mail day, coupon after coupon redirected away from Danny and toward my friend. The agitation in Danny's coupon-related commentary grew in a way that was, from the inside, extremely entertaining to track. He had moved from puzzlement to mild frustration to genuine low-key conspiracy thinking about the postal service. He had started checking the mail multiple times on delivery days, as though the coupons might arrive in a later batch. He had, according to Claire, actually called the restaurant chain at one point to ask about their mailing schedule. He called the restaurant about the coupons. I want you to sit with that for a second. This is a grown adult man who had made my home life consistently unpleasant for months, who had stood in the front yard pointing at me through windows, who had never once had the courage to address me directly about anything that bothered him. And he called a fast food chain's customer service line to inquire about coupon delivery schedules. I have thought about that customer service representative many times. I hope they are well. And then eventually, as these things do, Danny and Claire moved out. The chapter closed. The house returned to its natural, comfortable equilibrium. The mailbox resumed its full and appropriate function as a receptacle for all household mail without any interception operations in progress. The last week before they moved, the coupons came one final time. I collected them, as I had been collecting them for months, with the smooth efficiency of long practice. I gave them to my best friend. He used them that weekend. Danny moved out never knowing that the coupons had not mysteriously stopped coming. Never knowing that his postal conspiracy theory was not a conspiracy at all, just a person in his own house who had quietly, consistently, week after week, gotten there first. Never knowing that every single one of those glossy fast food discount bundles had been redirected to someone who used them happily and gratefully, and without any of the territorial hoarding that had made them a source of such disproportionate misery. He left still wondering, and that particular ending where he never gets the satisfaction of knowing, where the mystery just travels with him, is possibly the most satisfying part of all. Here is what I have thought about in the years since, and yes, this story is from a decade ago now, which somehow makes it even funnier in retrospect. The petty revenge did not fix anything. Danny was still Danny. The uncomfortable dynamic of living with him was still uncomfortable. None of the underlying stuff got resolved by a stack of redirected coupons. But it gave me something that is actually quite hard to find when you are stuck in a situation you cannot fully change. A sense of agency. A quiet, private, completely harmless way of saying, inside my own head in my own way without needing anyone's permission or validation, I see what you are doing and you do not have as much power over this situation as you think you do. Sometimes that is enough. Sometimes the small, petty, completely ridiculous thing is the thing that gets you through the big, exhausting, unresolvable situation. And there is no shame in that. There is just the quiet, internal satisfaction of a person who found their version of the move, however small, however silly, and played it perfectly start to finish, until the game was over. The coupons never came back. The cousin eventually moved on. And somewhere, in the 10 years since, my best friend probably still associates a particular fast food chain with a period of his life when the discounts were mysteriously, consistently, and completely inexplicably good. If this story made you smile, if it reminded you of the time you found your own tiny, perfect, completely petty way to handle someone who was making your life just a little bit smaller, smash that like button right now. And tell us in the comments. What is the most gloriously petty revenge you have ever pulled off or witnessed? No revenge too small. No story too silly. The pettier the better. Drop it below. And if you want more stories exactly like this one, from the massive and dramatic to the small and perfectly ridiculous, hit subscribe. We have got a whole catalog. See you.